Hi everybody, Charles here. I wanted to do a whiteboard video to talk a little bit about a few topics, things like native assets, captive sidechains, cross-chain communication, and so forth. So anyway, this is going to be a fun video to shoot. Yeah, let's get to it. Okay, so wow, Goggen's coming along swimmingly. A lot of work to do. I'm taking a deep dive on a lot of the technology and various things that we have to get done between now and the launch. And as I mentioned in the summit, we are looking at about 120, 150 days of work out before the hard fork. So at the end of this month, in the July product update, we're going to talk a lot about Goggen, a lot about where we're going, and things like native assets and so forth. And the presentations on Goggen and native assets at the summit should have hit YouTube by the time this video comes out. So as a consequence, if you watch that, you can get a really good idea of what's coming. And now we have to start talking a little bit about certain choices and design details. Now, I have some strong opinions about these things, and hopefully they work their way into the design of the product. But I think it's important that we start socializing some of these concepts with the community. Okay. So in the beginning, there was Bitcoin. And Bitcoin, as the first mover, is the least sophisticated and the least flexible of all cryptocurrencies built. And basically only has one asset, the BTC, the Bitcoin. For fans of my Udemy course I did back in 2013. And unfortunately, it has no clue what's going on in the world around it. So if you have Bitcoin and Litecoin, for example, the state of Litecoin, so basically, and we'll use sigma for the state. So the state of Litecoin versus the state of Bitcoin, these two systems are not sophisticated enough to really know what's going on. Furthermore, they're single asset ledgers, SALs. Now, the world has moved into an MAL system, multi-asset ledgers. So instead of saying, hey, we just have one system and it has Bitcoin, or one system and it has Litecoin, we want to have many tokens. So generally how that's done is you have something like Ether, and that's a base native asset of the system. So you pay the transaction fees with that. And then you have kind of this assets derived from smart contracts like ERC20, for example. And there's lots of ERC20 tokens that exist in the Ethereum ecosystem. Okay, and there are other standards for issuing assets as well. However, whenever you transact these things, they consume Ether as a transaction fee. Okay, so we live in a state where there's a lot of these old legacy systems like Bitcoin and Litecoin, and they're perfectly fine. However, they're single asset ledgers, and they can't really do what's called CCC well, cross-chain communication. And actually, I'm going to give you guys a paper here. Okay. Well, unfortunately, there's no standards for them to talk to each other. And so what's happened is, instead of trying to get more blockchains floating out there, people are starting to embed their assets within existing chains. And so we have this thing that came out of the second generation, the multi-asset ledger stuff. And right now, as a multi-asset ledger, we have ERC20 as the dominant standard that's been floating around. It's not the only standard, but it's certainly the most dominant standard. So we live in a world that's MAL. We want multi-asset ledgers. We live in a world that wants to do cross-chain communication. And we live in a world where we would like these assets to be just as good as if they had their own chain. In other words, the way that Ethereum does multi-asset is not so good, principally because when you issue your token, you're still coupled to the native standard. And we'd like that all of the innovations that we have work with each other. So For example, we'd like in an ideal world for Bitcoin to be able to talk to Litecoin. And we'd like in an ideal world for Litecoin to be able to talk to Bitcoin and talk to Ethereum and talk to Cardano and so forth. So we've actually been thinking about this topic since 2016, actually. 2016. And we looked at things like the color coin standard. We looked at things like what was happening on Ethereum for multi-asset NXT assets. You guys might remember that. And there was hundreds of little ideas that float around the space for a long time. And we've been thinking about cross-chain communication for a long time. And we've looked at it in things like NiPoPoWs. You may have seen our proof of stake Sidechains paper that we came out with. Okay. And recently we wrote a cross-chain communication SOK paper. So basically it's a roll-up of all the knowledge about cross-chain communication. We proved some interesting results with that. So we've been at this game now for well more than 4 years. And we're now getting to the point where Cardano is going to go from a single asset ledger to a multi-asset ledger. Version 1. Okay. So version 1 is kind of like Ethereum in that transaction fees will be paid with ADA. That's our current design of the system. And unlike Ethereum, user-issued assets, UIAs, will be treated like ADA. So while you do have to pay ADA as a transaction fee for this moment, your assets are actually going to be treated like ADA. They won't be differentiated. This is not the case with the Generation 2 MAL. So if you go to ERC20, this is a smart contract. It's not Ether. It's different. You can do lots of things the same way, but it is treated differently in the system. With our system, we basically say, hey, your asset is going to be accounted for and treated using the same UTXO system as ADA itself does. So the system doesn't differentiate the two. And we have some beautiful papers we've written on this, and we think it's a superior model. But, there's a lot of ideas like where do these user-issued assets come from? And also, can we have our transaction fees in the native asset itself? So right now we're in version 1 of the multi-asset ledger, but as with all things, we intend on having future iterations of this, and they can be rolled out pretty rapidly as extensions or additional standards in the system. And it's definitely possible to imagine a system where the native asset itself actually pays transaction fees. And also, when we talk about user-issued assets and cross-chain communication, you may have noticed that I've been talking to the Litecoin guys. Well, here's an idea. Let's say that Litecoin implements one of our ideas, NiPoPoWs. And basically what this does is it gives us a succinct proof said of two things: coins exist and not double spent. Okay, what does that mean? It means that when you see a transaction coming from a NiPoPoW compliant chain, without possessing the full chain, it's succinct, so like it's small, it's like the size of a transaction, you're able to verify that those tokens are real and they have not been double spent. So what this effectively means is that you could issue a transaction from the Litecoin network if they support NiPoPoWs, transaction plus proof, into Cardano. And then what that can do is go to basically a minting contract and create something called wrapped Litecoin. Okay, or you can call it AKA A Litecoin or C Litecoin. Yeah, probably that would be a better term for it. Cardano Litecoin. Okay. Now, why would you want to do that? Well, hang on a second here. If we had the native asset itself paying transaction fees, then what would occur is this transaction to mint Litecoin in the network would then create ADA and C Litecoin. You'd have this other asset floating around the system. And that other asset that's floating around the system could also be used as fuel for computation. So you could use this for Plutus smart contracts. And then suddenly, Litecoin now has smart contracting capabilities. And the people operating Cardano now get paid for those contracts that are powered by Litecoin and Litecoin. So when they get their staking rewards, they'll get ADA rewards, and they'll also get C Litecoin, which is redeemable for Litecoin because you can send it back. How do you do that? You take your C Litecoin and you burn it, for example, so you destroy it, and then this gives you a proof to redeem on Litecoin. So, using the magic of NiPoPoWs, Litecoin can send a transaction with a proof into Cardano. You can mint a wrapped Litecoin. That C Litecoin could then be used to power things within Cardano itself. Those transaction fees would then go to the delegators and stake pool operators. And so they get both ADA and Litecoin for that. And that C Litecoin you have, you'll be able to burn it to redeem it on the Litecoin network itself, and you could sell it if you wanted to, or do whatever you want to do with that. Okay, so what's the value proposition to Litecoin? Value proposition to Litecoin is they do not have to do a hard fork to do the things that we do on Cardano. They're partnering, in a sense, with the Cardano blockchain and using it as a service layer. So everything Cardano can do, Litecoin can start being fueled to do. The value to ADA holders is they now diversify and they have access to more than just one token. And they can use that token any way they see fit. And they get basically compensated for that token's use in the network. And in this case, the token itself. Okay, so more broadly, this brings up this concept of blockchain partnership. Versus competition. Okay, so there's this question of, we have 5,000 plus blockchains floating around there, Bitcoin on down, Bitcoin. Max Kaiser seems to really like that now these days. All the way on down to whatever is in the 5,000th place. And we tend to look at these things in some zero terms, where we say, oh, well, only one is necessary, and that's called maximalism. So we'll put max for maximalism, because Max Kaiser's max. Okay, and then other people say, well, maybe we're going to have IOB, an internet of blockchains, all kinds of blockchains floating around. They all do their different things. Like Cardano has a bunch of things that we do that Litecoin, for example, does not do. And maybe it's much more important for the IOB concept to say that it's just really important that we can send value and information between these systems, and that these systems can start transacting with each other. So if chain A consumes services from chain B, A pays stakeholders in B A's token. And without loss of generality, vice versa. Okay. So this is the model that we are starting to move towards with the Cardano community. The Bitcoin maximalists are the opposite, who say that all chains are irrelevant except for Bitcoin. Only Bitcoin is the truth. And if Bitcoin can't do it, it's not necessary. And if Bitcoin can do it, it can do it better than everybody else, even when objective reality gets in the way. And if you are part of any other chain, you are a scam, horrible human being, and should be in jail. And you're a security, and they're not. That's maximalism as best as I can understand it right now. And that philosophy seems to be fairly regressive. But the IOB philosophy, the internet blockchain philosophy of saying there's going to be hundreds, if not thousands of these systems, and what matters is the cross-chain communication and the standards to move value, opens up this concept of partnership. Basically, we can do things for other systems, and those other systems can pay us. And by us, I mean the holders of ADA and the maintainers of the Cardano ecosystem. So the stake pool operators who are small businesses. They can be bridges, they can be oracles, they can be smart contract processors, and they charge a fee for services. Okay? So we would love to explore this model, which is why I reached out to the Litecoin community, and I'll reach out to the Bitcoin Cash community as well and other proof of work cryptocurrencies. And what we're going to do is write a LIP, Litecoin Improvement Proposal. And what I'd like to do is take the stack that runs the incentivized testnet, which is actually still running right now, and we can spin it up as an OPFT cluster or deploy it on the existing network and see if we can implement the native asset standard, some form of it, a little early, and have experiment with native transaction fees there. And then, basically, if Litecoin wanted to, they could send wrapped Litecoin into the ITN. And then that wrapped Litecoin would be able to operate as if it was a native asset, and it would be able to pay in its own fee. So it's as if it was on the Litecoin network, and it would get all those capabilities that the ITN happens to get. And the operators of that network would get those transaction fees as an example experiment. So this would be a potential experiment that we could conduct. And this is this idea of blockchain partnership, where Litecoin adds a capability giving the holders of that system the ability to transact into Cardano, in this case, a subset of Cardano, the ITN, and then that's a safe sandbox for them to go and experiment and do things and play around on things. And when they're done, they can send their wrapped Litecoin back into Litecoin, and voila, minus whatever transaction fees they paid for the experimentation that they're conducting. Should this model work, then eventually we could have hundreds of chains that are regularly transacting back and forth into the Cardano network through bridges and proofs. Okay, so put Cardano here, and you have all these different chains that are transacting into it back and forth. And they're paying lots of fees. And if we're following that native asset standard, it means that the stake pool operators are collecting transaction fees in more assets. So you get an ETF of an industry. Now, this is not the only model that can exist. You can have a maximalist model, and if they ever actually implemented this technology, it actually would be competitive. They've had since 2014 to do it, but they haven't done it. And this is this concept of primary, secondary chains. It used to be called master-slave, but that language is rapidly falling out of use, even in different contexts. But basically, we did this in our original white paper. We said SL and the CL concept. So the idea is that there's one primary chain, and that's where the token lives, ADA. And then that token, ADA, can be used to power different chains that have different network logic, it has different consensus rules, it has different ledger rules, different computational model. And somehow that these chains don't have their own native token. Rather, they are at the service of the primary chain. So let's look at this in the context of the ITN. So let's say that we modify Ouroboros. And Ouroboros now, when you're a stake pool operator, instead of just getting one block, you get block Cardano, but then you'd also get block CL1, block CL2, block CLN. So if you're a stake pool operator, when your job comes up to expand the state of the chain, you'll actually do that for each of these networks, in addition to SL. So you'll generate the normal Cardano block like all the stake pool operators do, but then you'll make the block for the next network, the block for the next network, the block for the next network, and you'll look up that network logic and those consensus rules and the ledger logic, and you'll follow the computational model, and these will all be different, okay? So Cardano has one flavor, but then there's a different flavor for CL1, CL2. For example, one of these can be an ITN running the EVM. Another one can be an ITN running Yella. And they don't have a native asset. So what happens is that wrapped ADA would be basically used to power transactions in these types of systems. Okay, so in practice, you'd have SL. That's the main chain. That's where everybody lives right now. That's what we're doing the hard fork on, and that on the 29th and so forth. And then you would transact from SL to one of the CLs via a sidechain transaction, exactly like, well, spiritually similar, like what I was saying, Litecoin into Cardano. And then once it's there, you have wrapped ADA in CL. We'll call this X. And then you can use that to run things. So maybe you have an Ethereum smart contract, and we run that in a safety sandbox. And Ouroboros has been built in a way that a modification of the protocol would allow a stake pool operator to basically make blocks in all of these systems. So instead of running the state of one system, they can run the state of N systems. They get inflation for being the SPO for Cardano. So this is where ADA inflation would come from. So the stake rewards that you can get 6% right now. And then the rest of these would be TX fees that they would collect for it. Proof of stake actually makes this quite easy to do. It's not an overwhelming engineering or scientific challenge. There are certain things to think about, especially about how you synchronize all these systems and blah, blah, blah. There are a lot of little details that need to be resolved. But this is a model that you could have, and this was kind of an envisioned model that came out of Blockstream when they were talking about sidechains. They said Bitcoin can be that version of SL, and it can be very simple and safe and secure. And then you could have Ethereum as a sidechain of Bitcoin, send your Bitcoin into that sidechain, operate, and then send your Bitcoin back when you're done. So we have a whole team at IO Global that does nothing but think about cross-chain communication and think about sidechains and think about proof of burn and all kinds of different mechanisms to move things around. And now what we are starting to do is communicate with other projects, smaller cap cryptocurrencies and larger cap and older cryptocurrencies respectively, like Litecoin, for example. It's been around since 2011, a lot longer than Cardano, and see if we can convince them to start adopting some of the science that we've come up with, which will benefit their community. The existence of NiPoPoWs in Litecoin will not only give them the ability to transact sidechain transactions to us, but give them a better light client experience, potentially to the ability to embrace things like chainless mining, so you can mine without having the full blockchain, and a litany of other USPs that come from that. And because that standard exists, they can start sending sidechain transactions into Ethereum and all kinds of other things. So it basically makes your chain much more interoperable, and there's no cryptographic downside. They don't actually have to worry too much that somehow this can be hacked or something, because the NiPoPoWs have been around for many years, for about 5 years now. A lot of science behind it, a lot of great projects based on it. Several chains have already implemented it. and more continue to do so. And for us on the Cardano side, it opens up promising new business models. We can experiment with those models with the ITN infrastructure, and we can talk about native transaction fees with Wrapped. We can, as we move to a multi-asset ledger, really get specific about what does that mean to us, and when we go into different versions of the system, what is that going to do? And then it opens up the possibility of discussing partnerships where and when this makes sense. For example, or perhaps we integrate BATS or Hive or something, and we come up with some sort of sharing agreement there. And all these things, because of Voltaire, as we move into 2021, 2022, can also be decided with democratic consent. So all kinds of cool things can be done. So this is a brief video on interoperability, but I think it's a really important one to spark a conversation and get people thinking a little bit about how the world is going to look in 2025 as we kind of get a little bit more evolved in the cryptocurrency space. Are we going to consolidate to the Bitcoin is king and everything else is evil and wrong, and all of our chains are just scams and we're bad people? Or are we going to move to something a bit more meaningful and to an internet of blockchains? In which case, when we communicate with other communities, it's not saying you should transfer to us, sell your coins, and come over to our side, but rather maybe our two systems can coexist and do things for each other. For example, we have a very sophisticated governance system that we're building for Cardano. And this means that Cardano could become a GaaS, a governance as a service platform. So if Bitcoin, or let's say Litecoin, for example, supports NiPoPoWs, they could send in wrapped Litecoin into Cardano, and we could actually hold votes for ballots and other ideas, Litecoin improvement proposals and so forth, on the Cardano blockchain. And then you could actually get a representative sample of the Litecoin community, because you can look at how much Litecoin's been sent over for that vote. And we could even create things where you can create phantom Litecoin, where you signal on the Litecoin blockchain to create phantom Litecoin there, but you're not actually moving it. So like a voter registration step or something. And then you can use the governance service of Cardano to vote on things in the Litecoin chain for fees in Litecoin, which then get paid to the ADA holders and the stake pool operators. And you could do this for end chains. You could do this for all cryptocurrencies, Bitcoin Cash, Bitcoin, and so forth. And they don't actually need to implement a very sophisticated governance system for that, just the bridging mechanisms. So this is the example of what happens when you think about partnership, is that you say we can do a lot of things, not just for our own ecosystem, but for all other ecosystems. And all they have to do is just enable the chain's ability to talk to each other. We've gone a really long way since when I first entered the space in 2011. You know, back then when we saw altcoins, they were all just forks of Bitcoin, and they had different consensus algorithms and monetary policy, but basically they were just the same code with some cosmetic differences. Like Litecoin has script instead of the normal proof of work with SHA-256, and Litecoin has 84 million coins in its emission schedule instead of 21 million. And there are a few differences here and there, but to be honest, it's not significant. Whereas Ethereum and NXT and these other second generation systems were completely new code, a completely new way of looking at things, totally different algorithms, and so forth. So there's just been an enormous amount of evolution. But one area where we are still failing is there's a tendency to look at things as a sum-zero way. There's a tendency to look at things like maximalists. And it's just so counterproductive, and it turns people against each other, and it causes lots of problems. And we, as a company, IO Global, have invested a lot of time, effort, and money to trying to look at the world a little differently and saying, can't we all just get along and do things with each other and partner with each other, at least on the technology side. CEO of IOG sometimes is a bit competitive. All CEOs are. And not quite known for humility, but that's okay too. You have to be a little crazy and a little arrogant to think that you can go and change the world and build special things. But any event, the purpose of this video is just to kind of go over a lot of these concepts and get people discussing and thinking. The native asset standards are being solidified a little bit, and we'll have an update at the end of July on them. Hopefully we should have a test net with them running sooner than you'd think. And so you guys through a command line will be able to start issuing your own assets with test data. But it would be really nice to update those standards to start paying in native assets. And I think the ITN would be the first reflection for that. On our side, we'll write a Litecoin improvement proposal at some point and propose it to the Litecoin community and see if they want to do something with NiPoPoWs. It'd be super cool to do that. And if they do that, then we could actually begin experimenting with wrapped Litecoin on the ITN and all kinds of cool stuff there. And the more the merrier. The more people that can transact with us, eventually in 2025, 2030, we can converge to this idea of Internet of Blockchains. Now, in the next generation of the contract, which will come after we finish up all the work on the first 5 years, one of our proposals will be to explore this captive sidechain model. So you can call it like the capture sidechain model, or primary, secondary, or whatever we're going to end up calling it. And we would like to re-architect Ouroboros, where it's self-evident on how to do this, and also generalize the expression of ledger rules, computational models, consensus models, and network logic, so that it's easy to re-express blockchains, even radically different systems, in a much more generic way. We explored this with the Scorex project, with Alex Chirpinoy, which now created Ergo, but that work leaves a lot more to be done, and that'll be part of the proposal that we have. And it'd be really cool to say, hey, we can adopt arbitrary computational models. What's really exciting about this concept is if we find that developers really do prefer one model or the other, it would be very low cost and easy, like a matter of months, for us to begin supporting that. But then, because it's under the umbrella of all the Ouroboros infrastructure and the existing stake pools we have, we would still preserve all the benefits of our system: the speed, the scalability, the reliability, the settlement time, et cetera, et cetera. So it's going to be very easy for us to dynamically adopt things as we go in the captive sidechain model if we want to. But network effects are network effects. Litecoin's been around for 9 years. It's going to be around for another 9 years. That's a strong community. So it does make sense to also explore the partnership model. It makes sense to offer new capabilities to things. And it makes sense to try to help other people along and innovate. And it's also really exciting to evolve our multi-asset ledger standards above and beyond where they're at. Okay, so that's the video of the day. I promised a whiteboard video on some of these topics and concepts. I hope this is helpful for everybody. In the show notes, I will put a link to the NiPoPoWs website that we have, as well as the 2 papers for proof-of-stake sidechains and for our cross-chain communication SOK paper that we did. And I'll also put a link for the current multi-asset paper that we've written. I think we have 2 of them floating around. So if you guys are curious about that, you can read about it. And we'll keep people informed about the Litecoin improvement proposal process and all these other things. Charlie Lee, I think, is reviewing some of the ideas that we have right now. We sent some emails with their foundation, and we'll see if they're interested in it. And if they are, then we'll go and actually write one. And then it's up to the Litecoin community to decide if this is of interest to them or not. Wrapped assets are super important. We're already exploring those for stablecoins, because you can take pre-existing stablecoins, wrap them, and move them from the chains that they live on into our chain, and then you can operate on them. And remember, stake pool operators are businesses, and their whole job is to provide lots of services to people. And it would be nice to diversify their payments so that they get more than just one income stream, but multiple income streams. So it's very important to me over the next 5 or 10 years that model develop out, so it becomes more and more attractive, so we get more competition, and thus ultimately we can afford to have more stake pools. And also this captive model allows us to explore certain experiments that may be a little dangerous for the main chain, or potentially too data intensive or whatever intensive for the main chain, or hybrid models. For example, these CL clusters could be permissioned. For example, they could be Fabric, Hyperledger Fabric, or Atala, or anything else, and you can still move data and information and assets between these different systems if you want to. Hope you guys enjoyed the fire hose. Thank you so much for listening. As always, this is a lot of fun when I shoot these videos with you guys. And until next time, have a nice day.